maybe we just take a moment to arrive. I'd like to take a moment to arrive as well. So I'm just going to close my eyes. I'll invite you to close your eyes. Notice how you're connecting with the earth. Notice your body. Just becoming aware of different feelings and sensations in the body. Noticing how the body changes with the breath. Noticing what you're bringing with you into the space this evening. In your own time, allowing your eyes to open, perhaps noticing, just catching sight of your own fingers and knees and toes. If you're feeling brave, maybe noticing somebody else's knees and toes or fingers out of the corner of your eye. If you're feeling really brave, maybe even making eye contact with somebody and saying hello. Great. So welcome everybody. As Kema said, this talk is inspired by a poem, and it's inspired by the Enlightenment poem of the first Zen abbess in Japan. Excuse my Japanese pronunciation. She was known as Chiyono and lived in the 13th century. And there's a couple of different accounts that I read about her life. One suggested that she came from a peasant family, another that she was the daughter of a samurai. Either way, she was collecting water in a pail when she had her enlightenment experience. And afterwards, she wrote about it. She wrote this poem. This way and that way, I've been holding it all together. But now the bucket has fallen apart. Nowhere for the water, nowhere for the moon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means to me, and maybe when I say it again at the end it will make a little bit more sense than it does when I've just said it now at the beginning. So we are the bucket, I am the bucket, and I know what it feels like to hold it all together. I know in my body what that feels like. And I've got lots of different ways of holding it all together. The words holding it all together make me think of those times where I'm like, okay, today I need to do something, I need to perform, I'm not feeling at my best, but okay, here I go into the world and I can do a good enough job. And sometimes in my life I feel like that there's an appointment coming, or there's a meeting, or I'm giving a talk and you just have to deliver, so you hold it all together and something comes through, and probably something also of the holding it all together quality comes through. People can tell that there's that sort of edge around. When I think of holding it all together, I also think of some of the strategies that I use more generally to hold things together in my life. What is it that I'm holding together? My ego, I guess, my sense of being okay, my sense of not going too far out of my comfort zone, my not being overwhelmed by the world, by relationships, by whatever's coming up for me. And when I was thinking about these strategies before I gave this talk, two of them particularly came to mind that are very familiar to me. One is withdrawing from the world when everything feels like too much, which can be completely appropriate at a festival like this to make time to yourself. And of course, if you do it too much, there can be a cost to it when you're just in bed under the duvet and actually you should have been at work half an hour ago. And I can notice that strategy playing out in subtle ways in my life today still. When we were packing for Buddhafield, there was one moment where Satya was running around organising things and doing a lot of things, and I was watching a video on YouTube. I was like, okay, this is me withdrawing because I'm nervous about coming to the festival. And there's a cost to that strategy, because it means somebody else has to work harder to get things ready. And it also worked because I felt better, it put me in a state of mind where I felt less pressure. But I was holding it all together and I wasn't really in tune with my sense of, I wasn't really in tune with my own reality in that moment. I didn't know that I was nervous or feeling a bit precarious. I just habitually retreated slightly from the world. I don't know why I chose these kind of two strategies, because they both make me out to be, they're not the prettiest strategies that I could have chosen. So the other one is getting angry and getting upset. And for me, this comes out when I'm doing practical things, when I'm putting up shelves, when I'm doing DIY. This is when I get frustrated with myself. And really, any useful advice that you have at that point for me, I won't be able to hear because I'm too wound up about it. And I can take myself away and calm down and come back. But the anger comes up. And that anger is about holding it all together. It is about me trying to maintain a version of myself which doesn't match reality. And the version of myself is that I know what I'm doing. And the reality is that I don't know what I'm doing. That I'm pausing the YouTube video or flicking the instructions through. Okay, so I need this tool and that tool. And part of me likes to imagine that I don't need any of that help. I don't need any help at all. I should just know, because I'm a man, I should just know how to fix a lawnmower, put up a shelf, whatever it is. I'm remembering a windowsill in the house that I decided to take all the dead wood off and fill myself and sand down. And I anticipated it having a really lovely finish to it. And it has got a really lovely wobbly finish, and it doesn't look very much like the windowsill should have looked like, or did look like before I started working on it. That's the reality. And the anger is about pushing that away, because there's some vulnerability in me, there's some insecurity that doesn't want to admit that that is true, that I don't know what I'm doing in that area, because of a whole load of beliefs about, I guess, about what a man should be able to do, or what my father believed he should have been able to do, should still be able to do it, and couldn't manage. I inherited my poor DIY skills. I'm not going to show him this recording. So those are two of the strategies that I use for holding it together. And you will all have your own variants on this. And as I've hinted at in that last one, holding it all together usually means trying to rearrange reality in such a way that it suits what we would like to think about ourselves. So something happens, something goes wrong, and maybe it's our fault, but we work really hard to find a way of blaming somebody else or explaining it away so that we don't have to take responsibility for it. Or for somebody else, something happens and it goes really well, and that doesn't match our identity. We're the sort of person who things always go wrong for. So we tell a story to explain our success away. And that allows us to maintain a fixed sense of self. I am this sort of person. I am that sort of person. That's what we're holding together. That's one of the things that we're holding together. And it's exhausting. It takes a huge amount of energy. And the further you are away from what's really happening, The more you're trying to convince yourself that that isn't the case, I'm not this sort of person, I'm that sort of person, the more exhausting it is. The more likely we are to find ourselves feeling all sorts of things and not being able to explain them. I'm just going to collect my thoughts. I'm suddenly being distracted by drilling and drumming, and it's really great to be in the festival, but one of the upsides and the downsides is the kind of loose boundaries between things. So these strategies for holding it all together, this way of holding it all together, I guess if you wanted to, you could think of the three poisons: greed, hate, and delusion. They're all ways of trying to hold it together. When my eye is drawn to the drawer where all the chocolate is at home, usually it's because I'm perturbed in some way and I need to hold it all together, and having another piece of chocolate is going to help me do that in some way, or at least it's going to distract me for long enough so that I don't realise actually I'm not as together as I would like to be. The hate response is the anger that I've already talked about, pushing things away, trying to convince ourselves through blaming somebody or the world or feeling resentful that it's nothing to do with us. And delusion or ignorance is just all those different stories that we tell that don't really, often very unconsciously, that don't really match what's happening in the world, that don't really match what's happening inside of us. Suddenly the bucket falls apart. This can happen very quickly, or it can happen little by little. I think we always notice in one moment. The time that comes to mind for me when I think of the bucket falling apart is the time before I moved into the Buddhist community where I trained to be a monk. And things had slowly been falling apart for a while, but I hadn't been paying attention. I'd been holding it all together. I wasn't very happy, I was lackluster. Every time I sat on my meditation cushion, the phrase came to me, "You need to change your job," but I looked around and I didn't know how to do that. I had a drama degree and I was working in Marks and Spencer's, because that's what you do when you get a drama degree. You go into retail, or I didn't want to be a teacher, so then that really restricted my options. I'd moved back in with my parents. I was lost really. I didn't really know where I was going. And the moment of things falling apart for me came when I experienced something good. I went on a psychotherapy training course. And the falling apart happened when I came away from that. On the course I had an experience of being accepted, of being heard, of having a sense of meaning, of relating to people, of connecting with people. And then I came home, and then I went into work the next day, and I just recognized how broken something inside of me was. And in being honest with myself and recognizing how broken inside something of me was, I was able to choose to do something differently. This is one of the opportunities that falling apart offers. There's the potential for a different way of being in the future. Maybe it's an enlightened way of being, but often it's just a slightly better way of holding things together. We choose slightly less destructive strategies. For me, it involved moving into the Buddhist house in Leicestershire, which was a really good strategy. I also carried, I had this image when I came to the front door of the community, of putting down my bags, which I guess was putting down all of those strategies. And I thought, I'm just going to come in and just let this community, let the Dharma transform me. And of course, actually what happened is my bags followed me into the community, and I still had those strategies. I still ate too much chocolate. I still got upset when I was trying to lay a floor in the attic, whatever it was. But there was something else happening. In the safety of that community, I began to see myself, my bucket, more clearly. I began to see where the cracks were. I began to see what was already broken. And there were moments where I could just rest in being myself and not knowing how to do the things that I wanted to do, not knowing how to look after other people maybe in a particular way, not knowing how to do those practical things. Just rest in that sense of, oh, I guess this is how it is to be human, and yet I'm still being cared for by this community. They are also seeing me and accepting me. They are also seeing me and sending me loving kindness. So this is where the moonlight starts to come in the poem. The moon in Japanese and in Chinese Buddhism represents enlightenment, and it's also associated with Quan Yin or Canon, who is Avalokiteshvara, who's above us here, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Canon is one of the Japanese names for the Bodhisattva of compassion, and Canon, the camera company, is named after the Bodhisattva of compassion. I don't expect that is going to come up on anybody's pub quiz next week, but I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. So this is the sense that it is possible when we are broken to receive loving kindness from the Sangha, and more mystically perhaps from enlightenment itself. And my experience in the community was that not everybody at every time, and sometimes not anybody in some moments, but generally the process of living in community was one in which I received care despite, or perhaps because of, the person that I was, which was there was part of me that was surprised by that. Oh, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to be anybody different. I don't need to use this strategy. I don't need to pretend to be something that I'm not. I don't need to try and be better. One of the strategies that I had for a long time, which worked really well living in community, was the strategy of pretending to be a good Buddhist monk. And I was a Buddhist monk, so there was a lot of overlap with reality. But it is really possible. I haven't worn my robe today because I thought I'd be too hot, but it is possible to hide behind a robe. It is possible to act out the role of being a Buddhist monk and have a sort of false intimacy with people. That is very convincing to me, at least. I expect it probably wasn't that convincing to other people, particularly the people that I lived with, because of course, well, you just see people. We're much more, I find I'm much more visible than I would often like to admit. And yet, what I discovered was that I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to pretend to be something. I didn't need to hide behind the robe. And I'm sure I still do it sometimes, because not every part of my being has taken on board that lesson. And yet, some part of me knows that fundamentally, I don't need to do anything differently in order to be accepted by the Buddha, in order to receive loving kindness. We are all lovable, just as we are. When Satra and I set the temple up nearly 4 years ago, we were still learning how to do it. We had brand new residents, we had volunteers coming, and sometimes we would get into tangles with those people, which is inevitable when you live with people or you work alongside people. Sometimes you get into tangles. But what was interesting is that sometimes that somebody would really be getting under my skin and winding me up, and I could not make any sense of what they were doing, and I'd be like, just move out, or don't come back, or whatever my sort of really wound up thoughts were thinking. And Satya would be sitting next to me completely unaffected by what was happening, and in a very different space, and not even unaffected, but remaining fond and caring about the person who was infuriating me. And at other times it would happen the other way around. She would be frustrated by somebody, and I would be saying, yeah, but it's for this reason and that reason, and and just my heart would be full of warmth for that person. I say this to show that how lovable we are. Let me think about this. It was dependent on my state of mind as a foolish being. The person themselves was the same person. I was seeing the same person that Satya was seeing. And there was nothing inherently unlovable about that person. It's just they happened to hit a sore spot in me, and I couldn't manage it in that moment. So I'm saying that to shore up the argument that you don't need to do anything differently, that actually, just as you are right now, there is somebody on the planet who will be able to feel fond of you, who will be able to care about you, who will be able to love you just as you are. And this is one of the profound teachings of the Buddhist tradition that I practice in. And in the Buddhist tradition that I practice in, Pure Land Buddhism, we talk about the Buddha, Amida Buddha sometimes Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, as being something outside of us that accepts us just as we are. And to some people that makes perfect sense. They have an experience of being held by something that isn't themselves, that is different to their own small mind, that they just go, okay, yes, I believe it's true. There is something, there's a benign process in the universe that I can connect with, that accepts me and supports me just as I am. Enlightenment is often talked about as clear seeing or wisdom or understanding, but it's also characterized by loving kindness. There is a felt sense to enlightenment, and the feeling is love. The feeling is connection. The feeling is openness and receptivity and fondness for all living beings. And as much as we might try and work to that place so that we can offer that to other people, it is available to us to receive right now. We are at the end of a long line of teachers and ancestors who have been loving their students and teachers and students and teachers. We are in receipt of that spirit of loving kindness. It's available to us in this moment. One of the things that's often described as to do with enlightenment is interconnectedness, which is a very technical way of saying I'm available to feel fond of all beings and all things. I'm available to love whoever comes in front of me. I'm not necessarily available, the Buddha is available. Sometimes that's true. Mostly it isn't true unconditionally, because I'm an ordinary human being. But I've tasted that, and I know what it feels like for me to be in receipt of it, and I know what it feels like to be in the moment where I'm connected to the world, to other humans, to other living things. Earlier today, Ratnadeva was talking about the Druidic tradition, which includes non-living things in this sense of connectedness. And it's true, we can begin to feel fond of a landscape. We can open our hearts to trees and mountains and rivers. A couple of days ago, I was reading a collection of koans. Dogen, the Sota Zen master Dogen, when he was in China, wrote down a lot of these teaching stories, and he didn't use them in the way they do in Rinzai Zen, where you kind of sit and meditate for days and days on a koan. He just used them as little devices for teaching with, in the way that I'm using this poem as a jumping off point. And this was about learning from the natural world, and I can't remember the particular Chinese Zen masters involved, but one says to the other, "Oh, do you think it's possible to learn from the natural world, to learn from the spirits of place?" And the other one said, "Yes, it is possible to learn from places, but you have to listen with your eyes and look with your ears," which I really like. It's like, yeah, it's possible to be available to the whole world, but you have to make yourself available in a different way to the way that we usually think, a way that we usually go about our lives in the world. There's something more intuitive about it. There's something to do with the heart, not just the thinking mind. And to me, this speaks to the universal nature of enlightenment and the universal accessibility of enlightenment, of nirvana, of the Pure Land of the Buddha. We have these teachings, formal Dharma teachings, to inspire us. And most of us, I will speak for myself, I need the help of those formal teachings to put me into a place where I feel available to others, to put me into a place where I understand myself more deeply, understand the Dharma more deeply. But enlightenment is available regardless of whether we've got access to those formal teachings or not, because it is the nature of reality. It is available in every moment. And part of the nature of reality, part of the nature of what's available in every moment, is the possibility of love. And more than the possibility of love, the existence and the availability of love. And what keeps us from that? Holding ourselves together, pretending that we're not broken buckets. To the extent that we shore ourselves up with self-protection and defensive, some of which are really useful and really appropriate at particular times, we will be distant from this. And to the extent that we can go, "Oh my goodness, right now, this is how I feel in this moment," we become available to the moonlight. Chiono was looking for enlightenment. This isn't just a poem about holding yourself together, it's a poem about looking for enlightenment. She was trying to capture the moon in the water at the bottom of the bucket, and the moon is enlightenment. She was trying to hold enlightenment, which is much bigger than one small mind. It's much bigger than holding it all together. It was only when the bucket broke and the water spilled and the reflection of the moon wasn't available anymore, she could see, here's the broken bucket, here is the moon. This whole thing is beautiful. The moonlight is illuminating the bucket, is making the broken bucket beautiful, just as it is. The broken bucket may be useless for carrying water, but that doesn't mean that it isn't perfect, that it isn't whole, that it isn't acceptable and lovable and shining with moonlight, just as it is. And the same is true for us. In our spiritual practice, we strive and strive and strive for enlightenment through meditation, through learning teachings, through practicing ethics. And often the moment of awakening is when we go, "Oh, this is really fucking hard. I can't do it. This is the sort of person I am." I'm a broken bucket. And then we catch a glimpse of something beyond that, that is beautiful and perfect, and allows us to be beautiful and perfect, just as we are. I'm a broken bucket. I'm illuminated by the moon of enlightenment, and that's beautiful. I think that's a good place to finish. I like the sound of that as a finishing point. So let me tell you the poem again. This way and that way, I've held it all together, or I've been holding it all together my whole life. Suddenly, the bucket has broken. Nowhere for the water, nowhere for the moon. And yet, it's beautiful. Thank you.